The fluorescent lights hum at exactly 60 Hz, a frequency that lives in Megan's teeth by 3 a.m. Mercy General's ICU smells like antiseptic and floor wax and something underneath, copper mixed with hope, the scent of people fighting to survive. She moves through the night shift with the kind of invisibility that comes from being utterly forgettable. Navy blue scrubs 2 sizes too big. Blonde hair pulled back so tight it aches. A face that could belong to any of 8 million nurses in America. Nobody looks twice. That's the entire point. Room 347 holds a man with 5 bullet wounds from Kandahar. The colonel arrived 2 nights ago via military transport, his chest wrapped in gauze that blooms red every 6 hours, his left femur shattered in a way that made the orthopedic surgeon whistle low when reading the x-rays. Critical but stable. The kind of patient who doesn't talk much, who watches the ceiling and counts his breathing like a meditation, like each exhale is a small victory against the equations that nearly killed him in a desert 7,000 miles away. Megan checks his vitals at 3:02 a.m. The monitors glow soft green in the dark room. She moves her hands with the fluid precision of someone who has performed this exact motion, wrist to forearm, fingers finding the pulse point, counting, approximately 4,000 times. Her hands do not shake when she is working. That's one of the rules she made for herself. Hands work. Hands don't betray. Hands have a job and they do it. The colonel's eyes are closed. He drifts in and out of the kind of sleep that medication provides, not rest. Real rest requires safety, and he is a man who spent 12 years learning that safety is a theoretical concept taught to people who haven't yet been tested. His left arm lies across the blanket, and on his forearm, in letters precise as a military stencil, is a name tattooed in black ink that has faded slightly with time and sun exposure and the simple attrition of living. Megan. She doesn't pause. She has learned not to pause. Pausing is how people notice things, and being noticed is how you become visible, and becoming visible in a place like Mercy General's ICU means Dr. Sterling will find a reason to document your failure in the medical record where it will follow you like a curse. She checks the fall line. Saline drips at 50 milliliters per hour. The catheter is patent. No signs of infiltration or thrombosis. Everything is fine. Everything is exactly as it should be. But his fingers move. Just slightly. They trace the letters of her name across the ink like he's reading Braille, like his muscles remember something his conscious mind has already forgotten. Like a prayer to a ghost he can't recall. His eyes stay closed. His breathing doesn't change. But his fingertips follow each letter, M, E, G, A, N, and Megan feels something crack open in her chest that she has spent for years learning to keep sealed. She finishes the vitals check in 30 seconds. Heart rate 68, regular. Blood pressure 118/72. O2 saturation 97% on 2 liters nasal cannula. Temperature 37.2 Celsius. Everything is exactly fine. She documents it in the electronic chart with the kind of precision that comes from muscle memory, from 1,000 nights of identical notation, from the habit of people who understand that accuracy saves lives and carelessness ends them. The combat boots are in her locker. She has known for 2 years that she should throw them away. They are caked with dust that came from Kandahar in 2019, and they are evidence of something she has very deliberately left behind. But she hasn't thrown them away. She hasn't even cleaned them. She has simply wrapped them in an old navy sweater and hidden them beneath her lunch bag, a thermos with lukewarm coffee and a sandwich she will not eat because the anxiety sits in her stomach like an occupying force, making hunger seem like a concept from a language she no longer speaks. The locker room at Mercy General is empty at 4 a.m. Megan sits on the bench and pulls out her lunch bag more from habit than hunger. The thermos is still warm. The sandwich is turkey and mustard on wheat, purchased from the hospital cafeteria because the making of sandwiches at home requires a kind of forward planning that assumes you believe in tomorrow. She doesn't really, but she does it anyway, which is maybe the definition of survival. Her left leg aches. The injury is old, 2019, Sanjin Valley, Helmand Province, a shrapnel wound that left her with a limp and a piece of metal in her thigh that the VA doctors said was too close to the femoral artery to safely remove. She can feel it sometimes, especially when she stands for 12 hours straight. A dull pressure, like someone pressing a cold coin against her skin from the inside. Pain is information. That's what they taught her. Every sensation means something. Every signal from the body is a message that should be listened to. The pain says she has been here too long. The pain says she should have disappeared into a different city by now, a different hospital, a different life. The pain says that staying in one place long enough to recognize someone, or for someone to recognize her, is how you make a mistake. She hasn't made mistakes for years, and she hasn't made a single mistake that would expose who she was or what she used to be. Dr. Sterling arrives for morning rounds at 6:45 a.m. The ICU staff know his patterns the way animals know the patterns of a predator, the exact timing of his arrival, the particular way his shadow falls across the nurse's station before his actual body occupies the space. He is tall in the way that certain men cultivate tall, his white coat pressed so sharply it could draw blood, his tie a shade of blue that cost more than Megan's entire monthly rent. He carries himself with the confidence of someone who has learned that the world rewards volume and certainty, even when, especially when, those qualities mask a complete absence of actual medical knowledge. Megan is reviewing medication orders when he steps into the ICU. She does not look up. She has learned the value of not looking up. "Where is the night shift report?" Sterling's voice sounds like a man who has never had to ask for anything twice. "I need comprehensive notes on the Kandahar patient. And they'd better be legible, because the last set I received looked like they were written by someone who learned English in a war zone." The charge nurse, Patricia, glances at Megan. Patricia is good people. Patricia has been at Mercy General for 18 years, and she has seen doctors like Sterling come and go, and she knows which nurses are actual competent and which ones are just good at sounding confident in meetings. Night shift notes are in the system, Dr. Sterling. O'Brien ran clean vitals at 3:08. Colonel is stable. No events. Sterling nods without actually registering the information. He is already scanning the room, his eyes moving like a camera in surveillance mode, cataloging everything, the arrangement of equipment, the timing of tasks, the specific individuals who move with the kind of efficiency that suggests actual medical knowledge rather than mere job performance. His eyes land on Megan for exactly 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, something shifts. Sterling sees hands that move without hesitation or second-guessing. He sees a nurse who checks vitals with a rhythm and precision that suggests this is not her first ICU, not her first critical patient, not her first encounter with the absolute consequences of doing this job correctly versus incorrectly. He sees someone moving through the medical space with the kind of economy of motion that comes from hundreds, maybe thousands, of repetitions in settings where mistakes equal death. He doesn't see the Navy Cross. He doesn't see the 2 silver stars folded in a storage unit in Oceanside, California, 3 blocks from the Pacific Ocean. He doesn't see the medical license credential from her time in naval special warfare, or the 24 combat deployments, or the hands that have performed surgical procedures in tents and helicopters and the back of a Humvee using equipment that was never designed for field use but which she made work anyway because the alternative was watching a trained soldier die. What he sees is a threat. It isn't conscious yet. It isn't the kind of threat that Sterling can articulate or even fully acknowledge to himself. But somewhere in the part of his brain that understands hierarchy and power and the fragile ecosystem of medical authority, Sterling registers that this nurse, quiet, unremarkable, moving without complaint or personality, represents something that contradicts the fundamental organizing principle of his career. She demonstrates competence that he cannot dismiss as luck or training. She moves with the quiet authority of someone who has actually made life-or-death decisions without the safety net of a department of medicine standing behind her, validating every choice. In a well-ordered hospital, in a hospital that actually prioritized patient care over ego, someone like Megan would be fast-tracked to leadership. Would be encouraged. Would be promoted. But Mercy General is not that kind of hospital. Sterling finishes his rounds and pulls Patricia aside at the nurse's station. "I want detailed notes on that new night shift nurse. What's her background? How long has she been here? And I want to know why she's running solo vitals on level 1 patients when protocol clearly states that critical patient assessment should be conducted in pairs. Patricia makes a face. She's been here 2 years. She's solid. Patient outcomes are excellent. And for the record, solo vitals during night shift is standard practice. Every hospital in the county. I'm not interested in what every hospital does, Sterling says. His voice has dropped, which is always worse than when he raises it. I'm interested in ensuring we maintain proper protocols. This one seems to think she operates outside the normal chain of command. But that's the thing about people like Megan, she doesn't operate outside the chain of command. She doesn't do anything that would call attention. She doesn't speak up in meetings. She doesn't challenge decisions. She doesn't try to be visible. She just does the work. She just saves lives. And to someone like Sterling, who has built an entire career on the illusion of knowledge and the performance of authority, that quiet competence is more threatening than outright insubordination. Megan finishes her shift at 7:15 a.m. She changes out of her scrubs in the locker room. Her hands are steady. Her breathing is steady. She is composed in the way that comes from thousands of hours of training in environments where panic gets people killed. She wraps the combat boots, still caked with Kandahar dust, back in the navy sweater and places them on the bottom of the locker, beneath her lunch bag. She drives home to a one-bedroom apartment in North Park, 7 miles from Mercy General, in a neighborhood where nobody asks questions and the landlord accepts cash payment without requiring tax documents. She showers. She makes coffee. She sits on her small balcony and watches the city of San Diego wake up, and she thinks about the colonel's fingers tracing her name on his forearm, and she thinks about the look in Sterling's eyes, and she thinks about something her commanding officer told her 4 years ago when she walked away from naval special warfare. You can leave the job, he said. But the job doesn't leave you. She is starting to think he was right. Dr. Sterling stood in the doorway of room 347, chart in hand, his cologne arriving before his words did. Megan was adjusting the colonel's fur line when she heard him, that particular tone, the one he reserved for people he'd already decided were beneath him. The colonel's adult daughter and son occupied the visitor chairs, their faces tight with the exhaustion that comes from watching a parent fight for breath. Nurse O'Brien, Sterling said, flipping through her documentation with exaggerated slowness. Your notes are sloppy. Did they not teach proper medical notation at whatever community college you attended? The daughter shifted uncomfortably. Megan's hand stilled on the 4 pump. She took one measured breath before responding, her voice steady as a pulse oximeter reading. My documentation follows hospital protocol, doctor. Don't contradict me in front of patients, mouse. The nickname hung in the air like antiseptic vapor. His daughter flinched. His son pretended to study the monitor. Megan turned back to the 4 without acknowledgement, but she felt Sterling's satisfaction radiating off him like heat from a trauma lamp. He'd drawn blood. He knew it. He left whistling. That afternoon, a new write-up appeared on the unit board in the nursing station, visible to every staff member passing through. Nurse O'Brien, uniform violation. White sneakers instead of regulation black. Written warning. Her sneakers were navy blue. Not white. Navy. But the write-up was already laminated, already official, already proof that she was the kind of person who couldn't follow simple rules. At 1400, Megan sat in the break room with her coffee, black, no sugar, the same as always. 3 nurses at the corner table gathered their things simultaneously. They didn't look at her. They left. A 4th nurse, someone Megan had worked beside for 2 years, whispered something that made the others laugh in the hallway outside. The laughter sounded like a door closing. When Megan opened her locker at shift change, a printed image fell out. A mouse in scrubs with the caption, quiet as a mouse, smart as one too. She stared at it for 5 seconds. Then she closed the locker and placed the image in the recycling bin with the same precision she'd used placing a central line. Sterling materialized around the corner like smoke taking human form. His presence made the fluorescent light seem dimmer. The colonel's family requested a different nurse, he said, his voice dripping with faux concern. They said you made them uncomfortable. Can't imagine why, mouse. He walked away whistling again. The same tune. Something classical. Something that belonged in a concert hall, not a hospital hallway where a man was just trying to survive. One tear traced down Megan's cheek before she wiped it away with the back of her hand. Just one. She didn't allow a second. That wasn't composure breaking, that was human. And she had earned the right to be human for exactly 1 second. The next morning at 0730, Dr. Sterling's voice carried from the hallway outside the colonel's room. Loud enough for families to hear. Loud enough for everyone to know. You questioned my medication order? You, a nurse with what, 3 years' experience, second-guessing a physician? Megan had caught the error in the chart, a dose of metoprolol that would have sent the colonel's renal function into catastrophic failure, a mistake that would have killed him as surely as any infection. She'd consulted the protocol. She'd checked the numbers twice. She'd approached Sterling in the hallway before the shift change, before the medication could be administered, her voice quiet and respectful. Doctor, I think there may be a calculation error on the metoprolol dosage. He'd stared at her for exactly 3 seconds. Then he decided to make an example of her. You're overstepping your role, Sterling continued in the hallway, his voice carrying the kind of authority that makes people listen. Nurses don't diagnose. Nurses don't second-guess physicians. Nurses document and follow orders. Megan stood in the doorway of room 347. The colonel's eyes were half open, morphine slow but tracking. His daughter stood up from the visitor chair. His son looked away. Megan took one measured breath. When she spoke, her voice came out like still water, flat, calm, carrying no emotion and therefore carrying all of it. I've seen what happens when people die because someone was too afraid to speak. I won't watch it happen here. The hallway went quiet. That kind of quiet that happens when someone has just said something true in a place where lies have been comfortable. Sterling's face flushed red, actual red, the color of rage losing its disguise. His jaw worked. But he had no response to still water. Still water absorbed anger without changing. You're finished here, he said, and walked away. Inside room 347, the colonel stirred in his bed. His fingers found the tattoo on his left forearm, her name in script, the letters faded but permanent, a ghost of a memory his morphine-soaked brain couldn't quite reconstruct. He traced it like a prayer to a face he couldn't remember. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came in the break room at 1600, when Megan sat with her second coffee of the shift. For nurses were gathered by the sink, the good coffee machine, the one that actually worked. When she sat down at the small table near the window, all 4 of them collected their cups and their conversations and their belonging, and they left without a word. Just the sound of their shoes on the linoleum. Just the hiss of the break room door closing behind them. She was alone in that room for 8 minutes. She knew it was 8 minutes because she watched the clock. She didn't cry. That wasn't the kind of breaking she did. The breaking was quieter, the kind that happens when you realize that you've become invisible to people you work beside every single day. The kind that whispers, you deserve this. That was Sterling's real genius. He wasn't yelling. He was orchestrating. He was turning the silence into a weapon and Megan into someone the silence was happening to. She finished her coffee. She returned to the unit. She performed her rounds with the same meticulous care she'd used in field operations in Kandahar, where mistakes meant body bags and prayers whispered over somebody's mother's photograph. She checked the colonel's vitals at 1800. His pressure was 118/72. His heart rate was stable. His sinus rhythm was beautiful and regular, like music that only she could hear. At 2300, she charted her final notes and clocked out. The parking lot was dark, the San Diego sky that particular shade of black that comes before dawn. She sat in her car with her hands on the steering wheel and she did not allow herself to brake. Not yet. Not here. Braking was a luxury for people with somewhere safe to brake. She drove to her apartment in Little Italy, a studio, 2 rooms, the minimum amount of life required to exist. She made no tea. She did not shower. She sat on her bed and stared at the wall, and somewhere in that wall she could see every hallway she'd ever walked where people left conversations unfinished when she approached. At 0300, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number: "You did good today. The Colonel will be okay because of you. Don't let Sterling make you forget that." She never found out who sent it. The monitor screamed at 0300 Tuesday. One long flat-line shriek that froze the ICU into a single held breath. Megan was 2 rooms down, checking vitals on a post-op thoracotomy patient, when the alarm registered in her spine before her ears, not a rate alarm, not a desaturation, but the sound of a heart stopping. The Colonel's room. She moved without thinking, without asking permission, the muscle memory of 100 field operations taking over before her conscious mind caught up. The night resident, Dr. Patel, stood at the bedside with both hands hovering uselessly above the monitors. Blood. Everywhere. Not the kind that came from surgical bleeding. This was darker, thicker, the kind that accumulated in spaces where it had no business being. The cardiac monitor scrolled green, then red, then green again, the rhythm disorganized, electrical chaos. Pericardial tamponade. Blood filling the sac around the Colonel's heart, crushing it with every beat until it simply couldn't anymore. "Call Sterling," Patel whispered. His voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "He's in Phoenix. Conference." The charge nurse stood frozen in the doorway, phone in hand. "Board meeting. He's not available until." "Get him anyway." Patel's hands were still hovering. "Still useless. Tell him we need, I don't know what we need." Megan was already moving. The pericardiocentesis tray wasn't standard equipment on this floor, but she knew exactly where it was stored. Cardiology kept one on each wing for emergencies that weren't supposed to happen. 18-gauge needle. Saline for the syringe. Ultrasound probe. Everything that was supposed to stay in the locked supply room while procedures like this got transferred to the OR, got consents, got done by actual cardiologists with attending physicians and backup teams and time. The Colonel's BP was 56/30 and dropping. O2 sat 74 and falling. The ventilator was breathing for him, but air was just moving dead space now. His heart couldn't pump blood to carry oxygen anymore. The clock was ticking in a way that made conference room meetings in Phoenix feel like they belonged to another universe. "We need to get him to the OR," Patel said. "Still watching. Still doing nothing. We need to drain his pericardium in the next 90 seconds or he codes." Megan's voice was steady. Not requesting. Stating. She'd said similar sentences in broken Arabic in the dust outside Kandahar while rounds fell like hail, while commanders 60 clicks away screamed coordinates over radios that kept cutting out. This was simpler. This was just physics and anatomy and the difference between a man living and a man becoming a problem for someone else to clean up. She was already setting up the ultrasound probe, already running the transducer across his chest wall to locate the fluid collection, the black pool that shouldn't be there expanding with each beat of a failing heart. The echo image bloomed on the monitor, the pericardial sac thick with blood, the right atrium collapsed like a punctured balloon, the whole mechanism grinding toward total failure. Patel watched her work. The needle went in at the 5th intercostal space, just lateral to the xiphoid process, aimed toward the left shoulder at a 45-degree angle while she visualized on ultrasound. This was the kind of procedure that lived in textbooks and simulation labs, not ICU rooms at 0300 on a Tuesday when the attending was unreachable and the resident was standing there looking like someone had pulled his spine out through his mouth. The hiss of air escaping. The syringe filling with dark blood, not fresh red, but burgundy, oxidized, dead. 100 milliliters drained. The BP climbed slightly. 62/35. The heart rhythm stabilized. Not normal, but organized. Perfusing. Alive. 200 milliliters. The O2 sat ticked upward. 76, 79. 82. The colonel's eyes opened mid-procedure. Not aware, not in the way consciousness usually worked, but aware enough that something had changed. The weight crushing his chest was lifting. The pressure that had been building in his skull like a descending aircraft was releasing. His fingers moved on the bedsheet, looking for something to grip, and his left hand found the tattoo on his right forearm, her name, inked in military font, the letters worn dark by 1,000 unconscious touches over however many years he'd carried it with him. 300 milliliters of blood in a syringe. The kind of volume that shouldn't be possible, that made even Patel step backward with his mouth open. "Call cardiothoracic," Megan said quietly. Still not a request. "Tell them tamponade from a penetrating trauma site. Seal is holding for now, but he's going to need a real evaluation. And call the trauma surgeon. I want a chest x-ray, a CT if we can do it without moving him." The monitors had stopped screaming. The rhythm was sinus now, slow but present. BP climbing toward something that resembled viable. The colonel's eyes closed again, but his hand was still on that tattoo, his fingers tracing the letters like a prayer to a ghost he couldn't remember. Patel swallowed. Opened his mouth. Closed it. "I didn't know you could." "I know." Megan was already disposing of the needle, already documenting the procedure in the chart with clinical precision, time of onset, symptoms, intervention, outcome. All of it legal. All of it documented. All of it performed by a nurse with an RN license and the muscle memory of a medic who had done this with a colonel bleeding out in a mountain pass while Taliban rounds punched holes in the dirt around them. But that wasn't the part that mattered. The part that mattered was that the colonel's eyes opened again exactly 4 minutes later, when his body had enough oxygen to think about consciousness, and he looked directly at Megan as she checked his dressing. His eyes were grey-blue like a winter harbor, the color of a man who had seen things that weren't supposed to be survivable. He opened his mouth. His voice came out like sandpaper on steel, rough, low, terrifying in its certainty. "I know you." Not a question. Not confused. Not the fog of morphine and delirium talking. The kind of knowing that came from bone marrow, from the cellular memory of trauma survived together. His right hand lifted slowly, the fur tubing catching and twisting, his fingers still finding that tattoo. He stared at her face, really stared, not the vacant look of an ICU patient but the laser focus of a man seeing something click into place after a long time in the dark. "Your name?" He swallowed painfully. "It's on my arm." The room went so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights hum. Megan didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't give the satisfaction of a reaction to anyone watching, and there were people watching now, nurses filling the doorway, Patel's mouth open like a broken hinge, the charge nurse with her phone still in her hand. "Get some rest, Colonel," Megan said. Her voice hadn't changed. Hadn't inflected. Just steady as a surgical laser. "Your heart's been through enough today." She turned to leave the room, but his voice stopped her. "Wait." She didn't turn around. Just paused at the threshold, her hand on the door frame. "I carried you," he said. His voice was breaking now, the medications and trauma and sudden understanding hitting all at once. 3 miles. Through Sanjin Valley. Through fire. I remember the weight of you. The heat of your blood on my uniform." The nurses were very still. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. Somewhere in the hospital, a code was being called in another ward, feet running, protocols being activated, the machinery of emergency medicine churning through another life. Megan's hand tightened on the door frame, just for a moment, not visible to anyone but the colonel, whose eyes were still locked on that tattoo like it was the only real thing in the world. "I remember now," he whispered. She stepped into the hallway and let the door close behind her, cutting off whatever came next, the tears he was going to cry, the memories that were going to flood back, the knowledge that would reshape everything he thought he knew about the quiet blonde nurse who had just saved his life for the second time. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that by the time the sun came up, Sterling had already been on 3 phone calls, his voice smooth as motor oil as he explained to the board's vice chairman that there had been an unauthorized procedure in the colonel's room. that an ICU nurse had overstepped her scope and performed a cardiac intervention without supervision. That she had placed the hospital's liability at catastrophic risk, and that despite the successful outcome, which was, he acknowledged, fortunate, the breach of protocol was undeniable and must be addressed immediately. The investigation had already begun. The machinery of institutional power, once set in motion, could not be stopped by gratitude or outcome or the eyes of a man finally remembering his own ghost. Dr. Sterling's face was the color of old marble when he returned to Mercy General on Thursday morning. The morning briefing had reached him in Phoenix before he'd finished his second espresso at the Ritz. The colonel had crashed at 0300, and the night nurse, that quiet one, had performed an emergency pericardiocentesis without authorization, without a resident present, without approval from any attending. She had drained blood from around the patient's heart with a needle while the entire chain of command froze. She had saved his life for the second time. And now the colonel was asking about her by name. Sterling's hands moved with calculated precision. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't storm through the ICU making demands. That was for smaller men. Instead, he made 3 phone calls before noon. The first was to Dr. Hayes, chief of cardiology, a man Sterling had sent 17 referrals to in the past 2 years, referrals that meant private practice contracts, speaking engagements, publications in competitive journals. "I'm concerned about a nurse who's operating outside her scope," Sterling said quietly. "Someone should probably look into it." Hayes agreed before Sterling finished the sentence. The second call went to Patricia Vance in HR, a woman Sterling had helped navigate a nasty divorce by introducing her to a lawyer who owed him favors. "I'd like to open an investigation," he told her. "Professional misconduct. Multiple violations." The third call was to a private investigator in Los Angeles, someone he'd used before. Background check on a Megan O'Brien. Nursing credential, current employment Mercy General ICU. "I need everything, gaps in employment, references, prior work history. Anything unusual." The investigator's voice on the phone was smooth as oil. "How far back?" "As far as it goes." The machinery of institutional power, once activated, moved with terrible efficiency. By Wednesday afternoon, a second investigator, this one from an outside HR firm that specialized in hospital misconduct cases, had been brought in. His name was Marcus Webb, and he had the shark-eyed quality of a man who had spent 15 years destroying people's careers for $500 an hour. He requested Megan's complete personnel file, her credentialing documents, her background check from hire date, her references. One of those references was listed only as a former military supervisor with a phone number that no longer existed. Another reference was a VA clinic in Monterey that had closed in 2019. The gaps were like missing teeth in a smile, obvious, unsettling, impossible to ignore. Webb called the third reference on Friday morning, Dr. Richard Kowalski, listed as Megan's clinical supervisor at a naval medical facility from 2015 to 2019. Webb had a script. "Dr. Kowalski? I'm conducting a background investigation on Megan O'Brien, who's applied for a position at Mercy General Hospital. Can you speak to her character and clinical competence?" There was a long silence on the line. When Dr. Kowalski spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had taken an oath and was about to break every rule of it. "I can't discuss that," he said carefully. "But I can tell you that Megan O'Brien is one of the finest medical professionals I've ever worked with." Webb pressed. "Can you speak to any gaps in her employment history?" "Her references indicate she worked for you from 2015 to 2019, but her CV shows no employment from 2009 to 2015. Another silence. "I'm not at liberty to discuss those years." That was all Webb needed. 10 years of unaccounted employment. References that didn't exist. A supervisor who wouldn't say anything except that she was qualified. It looked like a cover-up. It looked like something to hide. Webb wrote his preliminary report and sent it to Patricia Vance with a single phrase in the executive summary, pattern consistent with undisclosed disciplinary history or security issues. By Thursday afternoon at 1400 hours, 2 security officers came to the ICU. They didn't approach Megan at the bedside. They waited until her shift was nearly over, until she was changing out of her scrubs in the break room. One of them, a man named Rodriguez with kind eyes and a permanent apology in his posture, handed her a paper. "Ms. O'Brien? HR needs to see you right now. We can walk you down." It wasn't a request. It was a protocol. The kind of thing that happened when something official had been set in motion and couldn't be stopped by argument or evidence or the simple fact that she had saved someone's life. Patricia Vance sat behind a desk that was too large for the office, in a chair that rolled backward on wheels that squeaked. Her file on Megan was open, thick with documents that hadn't existed 24 hours ago. Effective immediately, Vance said without preamble, "You're suspended pending a full review of professional misconduct. Multiple violations, culminating in the performance of an unauthorized invasive procedure." She didn't look up from the papers. "You violated hospital protocol. You failed to follow the chain of command. You performed a procedure outside your scope of practice." Megan took one measured breath. The fluorescent lights hummed above her like insects. She had heard officers give orders under fire with less certainty than Patricia Vance used to recite words that had been written for her. "I saved his life," Megan said quietly. Her voice didn't waver. Her hands didn't shake. "You violated hospital protocol." That was the end of the conversation. There was no room in Patricia Vance's worldview for complications. There was only rule and breach. Only policy and violation. Security escorted Megan to her locker in the ICU nursing station, right there where the day shift was arriving, where colleagues she had worked beside for 2 years could watch. Someone had already emptied the small shelf above her workstation, her lunch container, the photograph of her parents from 1995, a spare pen from a pharmaceutical company. All of it was waiting in a cardboard box on the floor. Megan opened her locker. Her badge was gone. A supervisor named Yolanda handed it to her in a small manila envelope. "I'm sorry," Yolanda whispered, and her eyes were wet. Megan took the envelope without speaking. She removed her spare scrubs, her compression socks, the wool sweater she kept for the over-aggressive hospital air conditioning. Each item went into the box with the methodical precision of someone removing themselves from a place they had never truly belonged. At the bottom of the locker, behind her water bottle and a pair of compression sleeves, were the combat boots. The worn leather. The scuffed toes. The bootlaces that still had sand in them from Kandahar province, from a day in November when everything was different. She held them for just a moment, pressed them against her ribs like they were something alive that might flee if she didn't hold tight. Then she wrapped them in her spare scrubs and placed them in the box. She carried the box through the main entrance at 1,600 hours. The afternoon sun hit the glass doors with the force of a physical blow. In the parking lot, the colonel's daughter was arriving for visiting hours, stepping out of an Uber with flowers and a hopeful expression. She held the door open for Megan without recognition. The woman saw a person in civilian clothes carrying a cardboard box. She didn't see a hero. She didn't see the woman who had carried her father 3 miles through gunfire. She saw someone invisible. By evening, Megan was sitting in the waiting room of the VA hospital in San Diego, 20 miles from Mercy General, surrounded by men and women who had given pieces of themselves to wars that had no names on the evening news. The waiting room smelled like industrial coffee and the particular despair of people who knew they were broken and didn't know how to say it. A Marine with one leg sat across from her, reading a magazine from 2019. An Army Ranger with burned scars across his neck stared at a wall. A Navy corpsman rocked slightly in his chair, his hands moving in a rhythm that wasn't quite a tremor and wasn't quite normal. Megan filled out an intake form with hands that wouldn't stay steady. Name. Date of birth. Social Security number. Current occupation, unemployed. Reason for seeking care, PTSD. Incident causing trauma, prior military service. The fluorescent lights above her felt like an interrogation. Every detail on the form felt like a confession. The intake counselor, a woman named Martinez with eyes that had seen their own wars, looked at the form and then looked at Megan. "How long have you been experiencing symptoms?" she asked. "Since the 4th deployment," Megan heard herself say. "Since I stopped being able to sleep without hearing things. Since I stopped being able to leave my apartment without planning exits. Since I watched a man's ribcage open up in the dirt and realized I couldn't save everyone, and that was the moment I should have known I couldn't stay." Martinez wrote something down. "When did you leave service?" "For years ago. But I've been in service the whole time. Just a different kind. Just with different uniforms." She touched the intake form. "Turns out those don't matter." In her car afterward, sitting in the VA parking lot with the engine running and the AC on full blast, Megan reached into the back seat and pulled the cardboard box toward her. She found the combat boots at the bottom, wrapped in her spare scrubs. The leather was cracked in places, soft in others. The bootlaces were still damp with sand and memory. She pulled them out and held them against her chest like they were something alive, something that could breathe if she held them tight enough. She held them and sobbed until her throat was raw, until her shoulders convulsed, until the sound of her own crying seemed to come from someone else entirely. She didn't notice the black SUV parked across the street with its lights off. She didn't notice the Delta Force operator in civilian clothes who sat in the driver's seat with his phone in his hand, watching her through the windshield. The operator took a photograph of the parking lot, the car, the cardboard box visible in the window. He sent the image to a secure channel with a single caption, "Angel 6 located. She's grounded." Within 30 seconds, a message came back from a general's aide in San Diego, "Proceed to extraction protocol Bravo. ETA on assets." The operator checked his watch. 22 hours. The machinery of the Navy moved like that sometimes, not with the speed of authority, but with the precision of men who had spent their entire lives learning how to find people who didn't want to be found. At 07:45 on Friday morning, the rotor wash started before the helicopters were visible. The sound came first, that distinctive thud-thud-thud that made hospital windows vibrate like living things. 2 UH-60M Blackhawks banked hard over San Diego's downtown corridor, their rotors pushing air that rattled the ICU windows and made every monitor in the building seem to hold its breath. Security noticed first. Then nursing staff. Then the orderlies wheeling supplies stopped and stared at the sky like it was opening. The first Humvee hit the circular drive at Mercy General's main entrance at 0752. Then another. Then 4 more, fanned out in tactical formation like they were clearing hostile ground instead of pulling up to a hospital that smelled like antiseptic and resignation. The vehicles carried the weight of authority on their chassis, a military transport gray, windows dark, the kind of convoy that made civilian traffic patterns bend and break. Behind them came a white box truck with USMC Command stenciled on the side. The rotor wash intensified as the Blackhawks descended toward the parking structure, their pilots executing maneuvers that weren't in any civilian handbook. Windows rattled. A coffee cup fell off an orderly's cart and shattered on tile. They didn't announce themselves through the intercom. They didn't need to. Security tried to intercept at the lobby doors, but a 2-star general in dress uniform simply held up his military ID and walked past them like they were furniture. He was accompanied by 12 personnel in crisp dress blues, their uniforms creating angles and precision in the lobby's sprawling softness. Behind them, moving with the careful deliberation of a man ignoring significant pain, was the colonel. His four-pole rattled beside him, a thin aluminum frame carrying a line that should have kept him in bed for at least another week. His face was gray beneath the stubble, but his eyes were locked forward with the kind of focus that only comes from knowing exactly what you're walking toward. The lobby went still. Hospital quiet had a texture to it, the texture of collective breath being held, of people suddenly aware they were witnessing something that mattered. Staff members appeared in doorways. A family gathering near the elevators stopped mid-conversation. The lobby seemed to contract, all the space collapsing into the center where the general stood, his aide beside him holding a leather folder like it contained something radioactive. The general's voice, when it came, was the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Not loud. Just clear. Like a radio frequency nobody could turn off. "I'm looking for Megan O'Brien," he said. She emerged from the ICU hallway before anyone could answer. She was still in her shift scrubs, the same blue that made her invisible in this building, the uniform that had helped her disappear. Her badge was on her hip instead of hanging around her neck. She moved with the same economy of motion she'd maintained for 4 years, every step calculated to take up the minimum amount of space. When she saw the general, when she saw the 2 Black Hawks still hovering outside, when she saw the colonel standing in the middle of her lobby with an expression like he'd climbed a mountain to get here, her face didn't change. Not visibly. But her hand stopped moving. The general walked toward her. His aide kept pace. Behind them, the medical staff of Mercy General watched like they were viewing something happening in a different reality. Senior Chief Petty Officer Megan O'Brien, the general asked. It wasn't a question. Sir, she said. Her voice was steady. Quiet. The same voice she used to request supplies from the pharmacy. The general opened the leather folder. He read without dramatic pause, without the theatrical flourish of a man building suspense. He simply read facts like they were the only thing that mattered. Bronze Star with Valor for actions in Kandahar, 2017. The colonel's jaw tightened at the mention of the city. The year. 2 Silver Stars. First for casualty retrieval under fire, 2016. Second for emergency trauma intervention in a forward operating base, 2018. Megan's hands were still now. Completely still. Like they'd forgotten how to belong to someone. 3 purple hearts. The general paused between each. 2015, 2016. 2018. The silence after that was the kind of silence that had weight. The kind that made fluorescent lights seem loud. Somewhere in the building, a monitor beeped. The sound felt like an intrusion. And, the general continued, his eyes meeting Megan's, the Navy Cross. Awarded for extraordinary heroism in action under fire. Kandahar Province, Paktia District, the 22nd of May, 2015. 3 hours maintaining a casualty evacuation under sustained enemy fire. Class 3 hemorrhage. 2 blood transfusions in the field. CPR performed for the final 400 meters of the extraction. The casualty survived. The colonel stepped forward. His footpole made that aluminum rattle again. He extended his hand to show the back of his forearm. The tattoo was faded now, time had softened it, but the letters were still clear. O'Brien. Her name. Carried on his skin like a prayer to someone he couldn't remember saving him. That was me, the colonel said. His voice had the tremor of a man pushing through significant pain to stand upright. You carried me out. 3 miles. I was dying. You brought me back. The general's jaw moved, a small muscle twitch that indicated he was already angry before the next part. This hospital suspended Senior Chief Petty Officer O'Brien for performing an unauthorized medical procedure that saved this officer's life a second time, 2 nights ago. A pericardiocentesis for acute cardiac tamponade. An intervention that any first-year surgical resident would recognize as the only action available that would have prevented immediate death. Dr. Sterling appeared in the doorway to the administrative wing. Someone had called him, someone who understood the gravity of the situation and thought he should know what was coming. His face went through 4 distinct color transitions in the space of 3 seconds. Red. White. Red again. Then a gray that looked like ash. The general turned toward him like he was targeting through a scope. Dr. Jonathan Sterling. No answer. Sterling's mouth worked but produced no sound. You are suspended from the practice of medicine at this facility, effective immediately. You are terminated from your position as Senior Attending Physician, Chief of Cardiology, also effective immediately. You will be escorted from this building within the next 30 minutes. Your medical license is under review by the State Board as of 0600 this morning. Your liability insurance has been notified. The hospital's legal team will be providing documentation of your systematic retaliation against a decorated veteran to the California Medical Board, the DEA, and the Office of Inspector General. The general turned slightly, addressing the room now. His voice carried to every corner, every doorway, every monitor and machine that had been listening. This hospital suspended one of the most decorated combat medics in naval special warfare history for saving a patient's life. Effective immediately, this facility's military contract is under review. All personnel rotations, medical supply sourcing, and trauma protocol clearances are suspended pending investigation. You will have 2 weeks to explain your chain of command decision-making. Security appeared. Not aggressively. Just present. 2 officers in their blue shirts with duty belts. One of them looked at Dr. Sterling with a kind of expression that suggested he'd been waiting for this moment. Sterling's hand moved toward his ID badge, some instinct that maybe if he took it off voluntarily it would hurt less. It wouldn't. The walk from the lobby to the administrative office took 90 seconds. Sterling took every one of them. His expensive suit, the one he'd had tailored at a place downtown that charged $400 for an initial fitting, suddenly looked theatrical in the harsh fluorescent light. The shoes that had never touched dirt, never seen a day that wasn't climate-controlled, made small clicking sounds against the tile like a countdown. 28 minutes later, he walked back through the lobby with a cardboard box containing the contents of his office. A desk lamp. Some framed photographs. A mug that said Physician Leader in corporate sans serif. The lobby was deliberately busy now, staff had engineered their break times to coincide with his exit. Nobody was looking directly at him, but everyone saw. The colonel stood by the fountain, still trailing his four-pole. The general was gone, already mobilizing wheels that would spin across federal agencies, across state medical boards, across the insurance networks that had made Sterling's career possible. The box was light. His professional network weighed nothing when nobody was picking up the phone. His hospital email was disabled by 0815. His office access cards revoked. His parking pass invalid. By Monday, the 3 positions he had pending offers for had all sent identical emails. Thank you for your interest, but we have decided to move forward with other candidates. By Wednesday, his wife, who had married him for the title and the house and the projected trajectory of upward mobility, called her attorney. By Friday, his name was trending on San Diego's medical forums, paired with terms like terminated, retaliation, and Navy Cross recipient. The cardiology practice where he'd been partner track called on a Thursday morning. They'd done the Google search. Everyone did. The video had 70,000 views. Dr. Sterling, escorted by security, his grey face a permanent record. The partner program was withdrawn. An email followed. At this time, we do not believe your clinical philosophy aligns with our institutional values. 6 months passed like that. Sterling stopped showing up on the local medical society roster. His name was removed from the hospital's physician directory. His medical license review was still pending, but the outcome was predetermined. You don't retaliate against someone with 2 silver stars and a Navy Cross. The state medical board barely needed a week to process that equation. The sun was directly overhead when Megan walked past the strip mall on University Avenue in San Diego's less affluent 92115 zip code. The storefront sequence was typical: payday lender, discount cell phone place, a Vietnamese restaurant that had somehow survived 12 years. Between them was a folding table under a pop-up sun canopy, the cheap kind with the joints that weren't quite square. Behind the table sat Dr. Jonathan Sterling. His polo shirt was wrinkled. It was a light blue that made him look jaundiced. His khakis had a stain on the thigh that might have been coffee or might have been the accumulated weight of losing everything. The table held insurance policy information printed on paper that had yellowed slightly, the kind of marketing material that nobody looked at unless they'd already decided they couldn't afford better. He'd gained 30 pounds, distributed unevenly across his face and abdomen. There was a desperation to how he called out to passers-by, a quality to his voice that suggested he'd learned recently that rejection had texture. Individual health plans, no pre-existing condition limitations, he called out to a woman walking past. She didn't slow. He didn't seem surprised. The colonel squeezed Megan's hand as they passed. He was her patient advocate now. The Navy had formalized it, made it official. She'd spent 3 months at the VA's PTSD treatment program, and he'd spent those 3 months learning how to be present for someone without trying to fix them. They'd written letters together. She'd called her family for the first time in 4 years. Her mother had wept for 40 minutes straight. Her father had simply said, "Come home, baby girl," and it had taken another hour of conversation before she could explain that the VA was home now. The colonel didn't look at Sterling as they passed. Megan didn't either. Her stride didn't break. Her hand stayed steady at her sides. The moment they were past the table, the colonel leaned over and whispered, "I need some Jell-O." Her face didn't move, but something in the corner of her mouth might have been the beginning of a smile. The VA facility where Megan taught occupied a low building that had been renovated 3 times and still smelled vaguely like old institutional paint. The classroom held 20 combat medics in training, young people whose hands hadn't yet learned to stop shaking in quiet moments. She stood at the front without notes, without prepared remarks, without the careful deferential positioning she'd maintained for 4 years. "Cardiac tamponade," she said, her voice clear as radio frequency. "Signs. Symptoms. Interventions. The pericardiocentesis, second intercostal space, midclavicular line, 45-degree approach, advance until you hit either the pericardial fluid or sudden resistance from the ventricular wall. Both mean you've completed the procedure successfully." A young medic raised his hand. "Senior Chief, how do you know when to risk unauthorized procedures?" "You know," Megan said, "when the alternative is someone dying in your hands." The class took that in. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical hum. Outside, a medevac helicopter approached the landing zone. Megan didn't flinch at the rotor wash anymore. The sound that once would have triggered her breathing to shallow now simply meant work was arriving. At Mercy General's main entrance, in a glass display case that had cost the hospital $3,000 and professional apologies, sat a pair of worn combat boots. They were the boots Megan had been wearing when she carried a bleeding colonel through enemy fire, when she'd spent 3 hours moving through Kandahar province with a man's life balanced against her shoulders. The boots were deteriorated now, the leather cracked, the soles separating, the heels worn to the shape of her feet from 1,000 miles of walking. Below them, a plaque read, "Senior Chief Petty Officer Megan O'Brien, who taught us that the quietest voices sometimes speak the loudest truths." Every new nurse at Mercy General touched those boots on their first day. Some whispered prayers to them. Some just pressed their hands against the glass and drew strength from the fact that someone quiet had changed everything. The colonel's daughter, pre-med, Stanford, already accepted to 3 medical schools, volunteered at the VA on weekends. She shadowed Megan during trauma intakes, learning not from textbooks but from someone who'd lived the equations between theory and blood. She was writing her medical school admissions essay about the nurse who had saved her father twice, once in a desert 4,000 miles away, and once in a hospital lobby by refusing to be erased. On a Friday evening, Megan stood in the VA parking lot as the sun cut angles through the desert air. A medevac was landing, its rotor wash pushing heat and memory across the tarmac. The incoming team was already moving, already focused, already ready for whatever was on that helicopter. Megan stood watching them, her hand steady for the first time in years. Not shaking from trauma. Not trembling from fear. Just steady. Just ready. One of the younger medics approached her. "Senior Chief, are you coming out for this one?" She nodded. "Trauma intake, GSW ×3. ETA is 90 seconds, the medic reported. Megan moved toward the landing zone without hesitation. Her badge read the Bryan, USVA, Senior Trauma Specialist in Clinical Sans Serif. Her title finally caught up with her truth. Behind her, the VA building hummed with preparation. Ahead of her, the helicopter descended through the San Diego evening, carrying someone's son, someone's daughter, someone who needed hands that knew how to hold on to life when everything was trying to slip away. The rotor wash hit her full force, and she walked straight into it. Heroes walk among us. Sometimes in scrub saving lives in the dark. If you're watching this, you already know the power of quiet strength. Subscribe for more stories about the people who change everything without making a sound. Like this video, comment with your own stories of underestimated heroes, and hit that notification bell, because the next time someone tells you to stay small, remember Senior Chief Petty Officer Megan O'Brien, and don't believe them.